Hey there, what's up internet? Welcome to part 2 of a commentary where I play Man vs. Machine as the Scout and talk about my history as a gamer. So when we left off, I had just started speaking about Final Fantasy VII, which is admittedly a story you guys have heard a million times about how Final Fantasy is the game that proved to me that games can be more than meets the eye. Now, I don't remember if I mentioned it last time or not, but funny fact about me in Final Fantasy VII, I actually didn't beat Final Fantasy VII despite it being my favorite game for the longest time, like years and years. What would happen was I'd always get caught up in all of the side missions, the chocobo breeding and racing, leveling up materia, killing the big weapons, the optional weapons, Ruby and Emerald weapon, that were only available in the American version at first. And basically what would happen over time was I would stop playing that file of Final Fantasy VII to play another game, usually something I had rent or bought. And then by the time I was ready to pick up Final Fantasy VII again, which I always went back to, I forgot where I was. So I would always delay. I never wanted the game to end. I would always just put it off until eventually I had a reason to restart the game. And it just kind of created this. It sounds like it's shitty. It sounds like I would sit there and be, oh man, I really wish I could just finish this game. But I enjoyed it all the more just for that factor. But anyway, not long after that, I must have been, judging by the ages, I'm not sure exactly how old kids are in accordance to what grade they're in America. I always forget. But I believe I got Final Fantasy VII probably around 3rd or 4th grade. And then in 4th grade, Pokemon became a huge thing. That was when Pokemon dropped. I was there well unconscious and of the specific targeted demographic of age when Pokemon hit. I was what Nintendo wanted, so I was lucky enough to be caught up in the original wave of Pokemania. And the thing was, even though I watched the show and I collected the cards and stuff, for some reason my parents never would allow me the game. I don't know why. It wasn't one of those games. My parents were pretty protective when I was a kid, and I wasn't allowed to have violent video games, but there was no real reason to not let me have Pokemon. I wasn't really sure what the issue was. I'm starting to think, and I'm trying to remember here, but I'm starting to think that I didn't have a Game Boy. I must have not had a Game Boy at that point, and that meant that buying a Game Boy as well as a brand new game is a pretty big expenditure. And, you know, of course, as I said, I didn't get anything unless I earned it. And as we also covered last time, I wasn't very good at earning things. So anyway, eventually, somehow I convinced my parents to buy me a Game Boy, I assume, and Pokemon Blue version when I was in 5th grade, which was actually about a year late to the fad. Now, luckily for me, the fad was still in full swing. Pokemon, to this day, retains its popularity with young kids, and I honestly have no idea how they do it. But whatever their crazy magic was, every kid of that age had to have this game. It was an enormous fad. Just trying to comprehend the enormity of this fad, I honestly don't think that I've heard. I mean, obviously, I'm not exactly well-versed in what's popular among elementary school kids these days, but to my knowledge, there has never been a fad as big in elementary schools as Pokemon was in my day. So, obviously, I felt pretty cheated getting into Pokemon that late. And I still remember having watched the show and not having played the game. I would sit there and like imagine what it would be like to play the game, and that would be all based on the show. And as many of you know, the show was and still is absolutely nothing like the game. So I had like a really unrealistic expectation of the game and how cool it was going to be. And a lot of my friends, as I was like, oh dude, I bet it would be so awesome. I bet if like you had a Raichu on your team and a Pikachu, and like a Pokemon attacked the Pikachu, I bet the Raichu, since it's like the older Pikachu, would like step up and defend it. And they'd be like, it's not that kind of game, dude. They would just be like, dude, calm down, it's not that cool. But there was no convincing me. I was determined to get this game, and when I did finally get it a year later, it may not have been the game that I thought it was, but it was still really great. And the reason that a lot of my friends weren't super jazzed about it when they got it was because it was an RPG. It was a turn-based RPG that involved a lot of grinding. And while like the collection aspect and the adventure aspect were very appealing to most kids, I would assume that the whole level up, grinding, math thing was not very fun to the average kid, and that was the aspect that kind of kept some kids away from fully enjoying the game. Not this kid, being a huge fan of Final Fantasy VII. Now remember, Pokemon came out a year after Final Fantasy VII in US, and on top of that, I got into Pokemon a year later, so this was about 2 years of me playing Final Fantasy VII, and being a huge fan of Final Fantasy VII, and grinding all my characters up to level 100 to go fight Sephiroth and yada yada. This game was perfectly fine by my standards. It had all of that collection, and the trading, and the adventure, and the almost gambling aspect of trying to find those rare Pokemon. But it also had this grind session feel that I actually really enjoyed, and to this day, I still enjoy pretty grindy games. Now, a game just having, like, pure RPG grind can't sustain me anymore, but, I mean, that was probably a large reason I was so addicted to World of Warcraft, because when I got into World of Warcraft, they hadn't really perfected that whole, like, questing system. Anybody who's played World of Warcraft will know that World of Warcraft used to be super, super grindy and, like, vanilla and somewhat into BC, and then as the game went on, they kind of made it so that you can, like, quest. You could sort of chain quests from zone to zone, and it would be, you know, it's still grindy, but it's not that bad. You're at least not just like killing waves of mobs for nothing but experience and just passing the day away. I personally didn't mind that at all. I was totally okay with the grind. But anyway, WoW comes later. So anyway, I had a Game Boy, and that led to some awesome games like Kirby and my first Zelda game, which was Link's Awakening DX for the Game Boy Color. Even though I had a Game Boy Pocket, I think it was a Game Boy Pocket. You could still play the Game Boy Color games on the older Game Boys, and I don't know. Link's Awakening was an awesome, awesome game, and that would sort of set the groundwork for my predisposition for loving Zeldas later on in life, because the Game Boy was the only Nintendo system I had, and I didn't get to experience that on the NES or the SNES and what have you, the N64, etc. So those were my systems for a while. We still had the Sega Genesis, which was getting played less and less. We had the PlayStation 1, and we had, me and my brother both had the Game Boy. He had Pokemon Red, I had Pokemon Blue. And, you know, eventually we got older, and the PlayStation 2 came out, and the GameCube came out. I remember we actually bought a Sega Dreamcast from Funko Land, refurbished. We bought 2 of them. Well, I should say we bought one, and it didn't work, and we returned it, and bought another one, and it didn't work, and I was just so mad, and I just, for the longest time, had this idea in my head that the Dreamcast was just like a really poorly put together system, because we had 2 of them that just flat out did not work and wouldn't read any games, and just trying to get those fucking games to work was so frustrating. I just wanted to play Sonic Adventure and Shenmue so bad, but, you know, I never got to experience the Dreamcast until after it was a thing, and that's pretty disappointing, but eventually we got the GameCube and the PlayStation 2. I don't remember which one we had first, but basically, when I had the PlayStation 2, I do remember that, you know, I started to get into some more adventure games and some more, like, I somehow missed all of the mascot games like Jak and Daxter and Ratchet and Clank and Sly, but it really felt to me like the PlayStation 2 is when JRPGs really started to go down, and I was really a huge fan of JRPGs on the PlayStation 1, and not just Final Fantasy VII, but also 8 and 9, and probably a few others here and there along the way, but that, you know, the PlayStation 1 was huge on JRPGs, but when PlayStation 2 came out, that was when Final Fantasy X hit, and I was really not a fan of Final Fantasy X. I still am not to this day. I just thought all the voice acting was kind of ruining it for me, and I hated the story and all the characters, so I started to kind of drift away from JRPGs at this point. The GameCube was actually a pleasant surprise to me, because a lot of people were saying that it wasn't very good, and while when we first got it, it didn't have a lot of games, and it came with Luigi's Mansion, which a lot of people really shit on. I liked Luigi's Mansion. I ended up playing a lot of really great games like Pikmin and Super Mario Sunshine, and eventually Wind Waker, which is still to this day one of my favorite Zeldas. And then on the PlayStation 2 side of things, I started to discover some really quirky games like Metal Gear, which, although Metal Gear is, like, you know, a stealth action game, anybody who's played the series knows that it's a pretty quirky stealth action game. So it had that really great sense of humor, a great blend of serious and silly. And then Katamari Damacy, which was just pure silliness to the max. What a great game. And that was really it for that generation. So a couple years pass again, and eventually I turned 16, and on my 16th birthday, I started working at GameStop. And I mean on my 16th birthday. A GameStop, when I was about 14 or 15, had opened up in town, not far from me, and I used to ride my bike there with my friend all the time. And we got really friendly and familiar with all the employees there, because now I didn't have to go over to, you know, a couple towns down to the Funko Land or the EB Games at the mall or whatever. And when I walked into GameStop for a job interview when I was still 15, you know, this was me interviewing for when I turned 16 in like a week or so. The store manager, Dave, sat me down and was like, "Well, we both know you got the job." So, and I was like, "We do?" Nice! So, when I was 16, I started working at GameStop, and back then they were still selling the Nintendo 64 and stuff like that, so I ended up buying my first N64. By now I had gotten rid of a lot of my games, because when I first discovered GameStop and the ability to sell my games, I ended up selling off like all of the games I loved, because I was like, oh, I'm never gonna play. I've played Final Fantasy VII a million times. I've played Link's Awakening a million times. And I cannot tell you how much I regret ever selling all those games. A lot of them were to fund my horrible Magic addiction, my horrible Magic the Gathering addiction. Because GameStop back then actually sold booster packs, and I would go there and sell all my games for store credit and then just spend them on booster packs and like the Mirrodin expansion and stuff. But, man, I really regret that, because I lost a huge amount of my gaming library that, especially now that I'm trying to collect all the Zeldas, I'm trying to replenish. I sold my Oracle games. I had Oracle of Ages and Seasons. I had Link's Awakening, which I had to rebuy. I had Link to the Past for the Game Boy Advance and stuff. Just, I lost a lot. But after I got that job at GameStop, I was actually able to, one, realize what a rip-off the trade-in program was and stop selling my games, and two, buy my own games. So the first thing I did, I remember, was buy an N64 and just start reliving all those games that I only got to ever play when I was over a friend's house, and that was great. I really enjoyed, you know, obviously Ocarina of Time, Star Fox 64. Eventually, by working at GameStop, I met my friend Jim, who then introduced me to the world of competitive gaming in the form of Super Smash Bros. Melee. And those who aren't in the know tend to scoff at the idea of a competitive Smash Bros. Game, but Super Smash Bros. Melee is actually one of the best competitive games you could watch, and if you haven't watched any competitive Super Smash Bros. Melee, it's still being played to this day, and you can go out, check some videos on YouTube, just search competitive Super Smash Bros. And something will come up, you know, some finals matches here and there. Most likely, any finals matches will probably involve Fox in some way, but anyway, I highly recommend checking it out. But that was when I started to get into competitive gaming and actually showing up to tournaments, and that was a really great scene. I never placed in any tournaments, but I always got a few rounds in, and it was always really fun. I always went there knowing I never had a chance of winning any tournament, because Jim was always better than me no matter what I did, and he was just a really great player. He mained Samus, Vin mained Sheik at the time. He was part of our crew, and I mained Ganondorf for anybody curious. Anyway, this went on. You know, I kept playing GameCube and PlayStation 2, and eventually Xbox. I think I ended up with an Xbox at some point, a lot later in the system's life. If not, we definitely played a lot of Halo over my one friend's house. We had a lot of good times playing Halo. I actually got pretty good at Halo, and the only person who was ever able to beat me was his older brother, despite me not even having the system. His older brother was really good at Halo. Anyway, time goes on, and when I was around 18, a friend, two friends actually, started pestering me to try and play World of Warcraft, and I kept saying no. I have heard about this game. I have heard how mind-numbingly addictive it is. I don't know if I really have the money to pay for a subscription, yada yada. But eventually the school year ended. I was graduating high school. I had some time before college to try this game. I figured I'd play it for 3 months, or at least give it a try, you know, whatever. I had a girlfriend at the time and stuff too. And World of Warcraft was the worst decision at that time ever. It was probably the worst decision I could have made. Now, looking back at it, I would say, from my perspective, it didn't really put a rift in my relationship at the time. I feel like me and my girlfriend at the time did plenty of that on our own without any help from World of Warcraft. But what did end up happening was I became incredibly addicted. And I continued to play it into college, and even after I dropped out of college. Now, was that the reason I dropped out of college? It probably didn't help, but in the end, no. The reason I dropped out of college without ever graduating was, and I still have not gone back, was because I had no direction and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And I'm still kind of in that place right now. But as my life seemed to deteriorate as I knew it, I dropped out of school. I had broken up with my girlfriend the year before. World of Warcraft became a great escape, and I think that was a major reason I ended up playing it for as long as I did. It was just such a great way to shut everything off and forget about the world and just worry about the virtual world in front of me. You know, as sad as that sounds, it was a fantastic way to just forget. It was like a lot of people have this issue with alcohol, and for me, it just so happened to be a video game. Same concept, different medium. Now, as anyone who has watched a friend spiral into World of Warcraft addiction knows, usually when you're addicted to World of Warcraft, you're probably not playing any other games. Maybe not so much these days, but back then, when the game was actually fun, it was really difficult to even find the time to play other games. There was just so much in this virtual world. It was so incredibly huge that you didn't even need any other games at the time. And actually, I think I spent less money on gaming during that time, you know, since I was 16 and first had a job and was buying my own games, because even though I was paying a subscription fee, I was only playing one game. But basically what ended up happening was, this whole time I had been playing World of Warcraft on a really terrible, shitty laptop. And this thing, if you want to talk shitty, it wasn't just like low frame rate, low graphics, and it would like freeze up a lot. This thing would literally turn off all the time. Just off. It would just go. I had to cool it. I think it was a heating problem. I think it would overheat and then shut off, and I think maybe one of the connections, maybe like something in the power supply was like melted. Like I think some of the solder had melted. And basically whatever happened was, when it would get too hot, my laptop would just shut off. I used to have to keep a literal like fucking box cooling fan next to it, and that would mean I would have this horrible feedback and ventrilo. It was like the most ghetto gaming system ever, because I didn't have a gaming PC up until this point. I never really played PC games aside from the occasional like Commander Keen on my dad's DOS-based system when I was really young. So eventually I decided to invest in a gaming PC. I actually got a pre-built gaming PC from CyberPower. I'm not proud to admit it, but I knew nothing about PC gaming or PC hardware or building a PC at this point. And when I got my new gaming PC, I also decided to buy Modern Warfare 2 at the time. This was around the time Modern Warfare 2 came out. And at this point, just by playing games over a friend's house, and this was the same friend that I happened to grow up playing Halo with, we had discovered Call of Duty 2 and then Call of Duty 4 when we were hanging out, because he didn't play World of Warcraft, so we weren't playing that together. We were playing Call of Duty together. So I knew about Call of Duty, I was pretty into it, and I decided to buy Modern Warfare 2, and that was when I actually got into PC gaming for reals, not just World of Warcraft. And actually, Modern Warfare 2 was some of the best time I've had PC gaming, and it was actually a great segue for me. Now, a lot of people criticize Modern Warfare 2, and with good reason. It didn't have dedicated servers, it was full of hackers, etc., etc., but coming from Xbox, this was actually a really good transition for me. So, I ended up really enjoying this. The skill cap was so much higher than it ever was on Xbox, because everybody was so much faster. Everybody reacts so much faster on PC, so you have to be faster as well. So I ended up actually getting really good at Modern Warfare 2, believe it or not. And, you know, getting to the point, I played a lot of free-for-all, because I didn't have any friends that owned the game, and at least on PC. And I ended up, basically, I was amazed if I didn't win a free-for-all. I got to that point, you know. And it's not like, in the grand scheme of things, that's terribly hard, but I felt really good about myself, getting really good at PC gaming, quote unquote, as it was. And eventually, I downloaded the orange box, because my friend actually had Team Fortress. My same friend had Team Fortress 2 on the 360, and I thought it was so cool. So I ended up getting the orange box on PC and discovering, you know, Half-Life 2 Portal and TF2. It took me a long time to eventually get into TF2, and I took a long break from it to play more World of Warcraft. But eventually, when I quit, I went back to TF2, and now that's my game of choice. I was actually really terrible at Team Fortress 2. Team Fortress 2 is very difficult to get into, in my opinion. I think it has a really high learning curve. But basically, the rest is history. You guys have basically watched the rest unfold. I started getting into YouTube about a year later when Black Ops 2. I eventually went back to my Xbox 360. I did have a 360 at that time and a Wii. But they barely got touched due to World of Warcraft. But eventually I went back to PC gaming. I bought, when Black Ops came out, I started a YouTube channel, and you guys have seen the rest unfold in front of your very eyes. So that's my story, and my question for you guys today is, what is your game of choice that takes up the most time? Everybody has that one game they always go back to, and it changes from time to time. Mine right now is obviously Team Fortress 2, and for a very long time was World of Warcraft, but what is your go-to game that when you're bored, you have some free time, you just gotta play this game for an hour or so? Go ahead and leave me a comment in the comments section. I would like to read your stories. I did actually keep up with all of the stories on the previous video. And one last thing I wanted to say, also shout out to Blades, who appeared in this video. He was also a fan, just like the other fella that I mentioned last time, but he was too shy to say anything. So I actually met up with them later in a game that I got matchmade into in another MvM game. Things didn't go quite as swimmingly. We all ended up quitting. But what's up, guys? Good to see you again. And as for the rest of you, go ahead and like the video if you did enjoy it, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.